when you're linked with the areas of the UFOs, it also encompasses parts of the supernatural, and
Mm,
we know that through cases of cryptids and people that seen UFOs or had some kind of abduction, and
mm,
also life after death. And I had an experience back in 1999. We had a colleague, a friend, who was sadly, very sadly dying of cancer,
mm,
and we all knew that he only had about 18 months to live. He was a swimmer, physically fit, good
mm.
lad. Yeah, and he was only 19 at the time when he
Oh,
contracted this
crikey.
disease. So
Mm,
as he was going through his illness, I approached him and I said to him, look, his name was Gareth. And I said, would you do me a favor? Because at that point I was involved in UFO and psychic research.
mm,
And I said, would you be able to show yourself to me after you've died?
wow,
And because I'd given him a redundant manuscript called The Eternal Cosmic Corridor to read while
mm,
he was going through his illness, which explored this.
mm,
He didn't say much about that when he came back. So he said, "Well, how do you expect me to do that?" In
mm,
answer to my question. And I said, "Well, I don't know. I'm sure you'll find a way." And he said, I'll tell you what else, beam down like they do on Star Trek, because he loves Star Trek.
yeah, yeah.
Well, anyway, he died in the summer of 1999.
Mm,
And then after his funeral, I went into an old bookstore that's owned by an author here in Bedford,
mm,
and Mr. Richard Wildman, who wrote books on Bedfordshire, and he had a secondhand bookstore, and I was always in there frequenting
mm,
the occult section.
mm.
And when I was in there, this book fell on the floor, and it was called Reunions by Dr. Raymond Moody, and it was about how to
Yeah.
communicate with the dead using mirrors and other objects of divination. So I picked up the book and I took it home and I read it, and in there was an experiment.
Mm,
He called it the mirror experiment, and it was where you get a mirror
mm,
and you lay it in an angle so that you're sitting in a chair. And when you're looking into the mirror, you can see the reflection of the ceiling. Has to be semi-darkened room,
mm,
and what you do is you stare into this mirror and think about the person you want to come through.
mm.
Well, I did the experiment, and the only thing that I did get through was the face of Thomas the Tank Engine, the children's
Brilliant.
character. I don't know why that was there. So I put it away and thought it failed. And
Mm,
in the winter of 1999,
mm,
I came home from work. I sat in the kitchen and I was looking through our conservatory glass doors
mm,
and led out to the garden. And our garden, it has a wall and a gate, a very thick gate that's locked, and the entrance to the garage is also locked.
mm,
So I'm sitting in the kitchen looking through the glass conservatory doors, the windows, the glass to it, just, my mind somewhere else. And all of a sudden I see this, what I think is a young man, and it is. And I thought, my goodness, someone's intruded in the property.
mm,
And he walked where the outside was to our back garden, where the entrance to the garage is.
mm.
And he turned to face me, and I stood up, and it was Gareth. And he was wearing his cap, white t-shirt, blue jeans.
Wow.
There was no communication, but he was visually there.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden, he started to sparkle like all these little lights
All right.
and then disappeared. And I pulled back the door to the conservatory and then
Yeah.
opened up the door
Uh,
and it was gone. So that was the one and only real time that I have. Well, there's been another occasion, but not with him. And it was very brief. But that was the one time that I had an experience with a deceased person,
mm,
not so much as a ghost. And I had the feeling that he'd been kind of like giving me the message back to say, hey, I can do that. And of course, the beaming up like Star Trek at the end with the stars was quite spectacular.
wow.
That actually happened. There was no communication. And when I read further into Dr. Raymond Moody's book, Reunions, when he tried the experiment and he wanted, I think it was his mum, he was after the experiment, he was laying on a couch, and then his mother-in-law that he didn't get on with came in
Mm,
to the room. And when you have these episodes, when they happen to you, it's almost like it's perfectly normal. It's like you and I are just having this chat now.
mm,
And yet when you relate it to someone else, they're like, it's a big wow factor associated with it. So it's kind of like a very strange, combination of these facts. And this is why I started to get involved with the psychic phenomena, with clairvoyance, because of that. And there was a build up to that. And that all started in the very beginning the same month, the same year as Princess Diana, when my maternal grandmother had passed over in Somerset. She was in a Somerset hospital, dying of cancer, and we
mm,
got to see her. And a week later, I was at home, and in
mm,
my bed, and I woke up in the early hours of the morning and started to cry, and I was upset. I knew it had something to do with my grandma.
mm,
And then all of a sudden her voice came in my head and I can still remember what she said. She said, "Why are you crying? Why are you crying?"
mm,
And then she had this there was this feeling of peace. And
mm,
then she showed an image of me and my brother as babies in her lap. There's a photograph of that. And then 10 minutes later, the phone rang and she'd passed. And that was the start of it. So I do believe that in elements of the paranormal, as we call it, whether it be ghosts
mm,
or
mm,
loved ones or cryptids or UFOs, I think we're dealing with some kind of interdimensional construct. And I also believe that there are connections to be made when, for instance, you have a UFO encounter, which happened to me and my twin brother,
mm,
and then, of course, this led on into the psychic department
mm,
and exploring that area. And then, of course, taking some pictures of what we consider to be cryptids.
mm,
And so it's kind of unusual. I think that this kind of hitchhiker effect does take place because those in Skinwalker Ranch did report this. And when you think about it, it's not because you're making anything fit.
mm,
It's stating that has something changed within you?
mm,
Has the energy around you changed? Are you sending out a different signal that's not the same as other, ordinary folk around you that don't have these experiences?
mm,
So that is an interesting point, I think, when you're dealing with areas of the paranormal. And UFO research leads you into conscious research, leads you into interdimensional research. And so it's not just kind of like compacted into one box and this is what this is and that's what that is. I think
yeah,
there is a combination of these
that's
subjects.
interesting. Because what's your opinion on what happens? Because I believe we've all got souls. Animals have souls. What happens when we die? Where are they going? To another dimension or to an afterlife? What's your opinion?
Well, that is interesting because when I was very young and we lived in South Africa, I nearly drowned and I had an experience then. I was all but about 6 years of age, maybe a little bit older.
Mm,
And I still remember the experience. There was no light, there was no tunnel.
mm,
And I remembered when I was under the water, I seemed to be in the air, and there was a bald-headed man that dived in, and I had no connection to that person under there.
right,
That
yeah.
didn't. And then, of course, I found myself in this beautiful land, this world,
Mm,
and so I believe that, the experience is very unique and different. I think it's perhaps interdimensional. There
mm,
was a point where I felt like I was at home. It
mm,
could have been another planet. People tell me heaven or the afterlife. It could have been another planet. I was in this place filled with rocks,
mm,
and I felt this instant connection with them. It was a deep feeling of a recall, a knowing, a remembering that's starting to surface. And I think what happens is that in this life, because we're recording on
mm,
a very limited flow of conscious awareness, our brain is translating information that I believe is recorded and then stored within the secondary body, the astral body or the etheric body. And when death occurs, there's a severance between that limited flow of conscious awareness. And then whoosh, it's like this, wow, it's like it's all there.
this is how it is.
Yeah, and so I believe that it's possible that people call it heaven, but I don't believe that we all gravitate to the same place. I believe that like UFO encounters and alien experiences,
Mm.
it's unique to the individual. So it seems to operate on an individual basis.
I mean, do you think souls come back as well?
That is a very interesting question. Do we reincarnate? Well, I've got to joke and say, why on earth would I come back here? When I go back, I'm going to get a refund. Because I mean, it's possible that we're going through an experience where we're recording our experiences, rather like making a film,
Mm,
and then when we pass over, we're adding to the process of creation. Like building upon an experience that gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Maybe we're all part of a united consciousness that is exploring itself through us, that we're all part of that, but we're also individual at the same time. It's a
wow.
little bit of a contradiction to think that way. But I've often thought about that. And the process of reincarnation is interesting. I mean, do they get in a reincarnation bank or how is it done? I've
Yeah.
explored this with other researchers, and one particular person said to me that in on the other side, he literally took himself to the beach, sat down, meditated, and then came down here. And in another case that I dealt with years ago, And one person, as they were dying, they then found themselves immediately coming into a new body
Mm.
without any intermediary point within the other side. So we don't know. We have no idea. But there again, if we only have one incarnation, what's the point?
Do you think this is a kind of a cosmic thing as opposed to just planet Earth? Because, for instance, what would happen if human life was wiped? It could happen very fairly soon. What would happen if human life was wiped out from Earth?
Yeah, well,
These souls still exist. Where would they go?
we see this as a very human experience. And when you're linked with near-death experience research and conscious research, afterlife research, life between life research,
Mm.
we consider ourselves to be human, but I don't feel that is the case. I believe that the spirit, or rather people call it the soul,
Mm.
is the energy that permeates
Sure.
this biological Earth matrix.
Mm.
So when we pass over, we will remember and see our loved ones the way that we had and record them because they probably got the imprint on that,
Mhm.
the astral imprint or the etheric imprint of how they were when they're on this side of life. But that doesn't mean to say that that's what they ultimately represent when they pass over. If you look at the Egyptians, for instance, they were very interested and very connected with the afterlife. And we know that their pyramids of Cheops was built to, as we understand theoretically from other research, to send their spirit to the Orion star system. They wanted to get
Yeah.
off.
Sure.
So you hear about these other stories of interplanetary connections. So it's a good point in question, but I don't believe that we are ultimately human. I think we're a spirit going through a human experience, so to speak.
Wow. Okay. Because you mentioned like Earth, the Earth matrix. So could life on Earth be it's basically like a soul simulation of some.
An interesting point. There are two different, ideas about that. Some people consider it to be a trap. I think that the Earth, within its primordial creation, was not meant to be as it is today.
Sure.
My idea is that it's been hijacked. And I say that because if you go into the ancient antediluvian texts,
Hmm.
the Gnostic texts, they're telling a different story about the fall, the descent of the spirit.
Hmm.
And of course, the creation, as we know, the Anunnaki, the archons,
Hmm.
and of course, then the total creation of the human, which is endowed with the spirit, and the archons were not. It's a story that goes back a long way, and that kind of makes sense if there is another force here that's holding us, locking us into this reality as a source of energy because they don't have what we have. And, you get other people on the other side of the coin saying, well, this is an Earth which is a school, a pretty harsh one, I think.
Hmm.
When people say to me, they say, well, you plan your journey before you come down here. I don't doubt that. But the argument with that, Mark, is that, well, Auschwitz, dare we mention it, third world countries, war-torn countries,
Yeah.
poor lives. I mean, who would want to come into that experience?
Well, this is it. Yeah. I heard that someone told me the other day that you choose your own parents. And I found that hard to take because I didn't have very good parents.
No.
Uh, so,
Sorry.
why would you do that? Why would you choose evil?
I think,
You
yeah,
know that.
a
Yeah.
really good point. I mean, how does the process occur? But I think that within the field of potentiality, people say to me when because I do readings for people all the time, I'm black and white grounded. I just need a yes or no to confirm. They wanted the future. Well, here it is and it's gone. Here it is and it's gone. There's never a future because that point has hit the
Yeah.
particle and then becomes a wave of memory. But I
Sure.
do believe that there is a field of potentiality that we may send out. But as regards to that question of planning the journey, I think perhaps we have an outline, but
Mm.
then we have free will. And
Mm.
then, of course, we are a species that are unpredictable.
Mm.
So, people can make choices, and those choices can change something for someone else in a positive or negative light.
Mm.
So it's a very, very complex area. I don't believe that things are random because people experience deja vu
Mm.
and they have synchronicities. I've had them. I'm sure you've had them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of interesting when we theorize as to what that is, whether or not we have alternative timelines, alternative lives, that we're living multiple lives in multiple dimensions of reality. And that, there can be a convergence between the two at some point within those lives, within this life and their life, or the other part of
Mm.
who and what you are. So it's an interesting question. And this is something we've been looking at also in our research with regards to what is it that we are?
Mm.
Why are we here? where have we come from? Where are we going? These are the questions that most people seek. But most people, they are fine with life. They live and then they say, well, I'm dead, I'm dead. That's it. And it's like, for me, that's a horror story.
That's
Because,
just,
but how can you then relate that to UFO activity or
yeah,
psychic
that is
phenomena?
true for most people, but then a lot of those people will have experiences on that journey with the
Yes.
blinkers on, but something will upset them and think, well, actually, this happened and I can't explain it and it's not part of the plan. And
No.
it might change their thinking. So I guess it's getting people to open up.
Yes, that's right. And I think from the system that we serve hasn't helped because whenever there's, some kind of opening or revelation about UFOs or life after death, for instance, or any number of those areas that sit within what we call the supernatural, they'll denounce it. And when we go back to the past, it's almost as if we're not allowed to look into the past. The past has been changed. And even memory, we don't, other than psychic residue or some kind of recall through regression or even naturally tells us that we're much more than just biological automatons with a sell-by date. So I do believe that there is purpose and design, but what that is, we don't know ultimately. And I think, it's fair to say the human has always felt to be subjugated, throughout the ages. We've always had to suffer. If you think about it, and I'm sorry, but I believe it. They say about slavery, but we're still a modern day slave labor force from the
Mhm.
system that we serve.
So,
So I think that's very interesting to speculate about the bigger question. And the thing is, when you've been touched by the singularity, in any manner, whether it be UFOs, psychic phenomena, whatever, it changes you, and you start to consider the bigger question.
mm,
And I don't believe in the primordial version of evolution, and that they all just happen with a big bang. You need something to create the bang in the first place. It's just like people just go along and say, "Oh, I believe that," and that's what happened,
yeah, that
and we'll just
doesn't
take the
make any
bait.
sense.
No, we just take the basic version, which most people believe.
Mm. Really, really good points. I just It's a hard question to answer, but obviously life in the universe was created, but who who's the creator?
We have no idea. I mean, but in the primordial sense, something was responsible. I don't believe that within our human genesis that, when we look at it, it's although we have problems as humans,
Mm,
the whole concept is perfect with its symmetry. I mean, if you think about the Earth, the
mm,
gravitational forces holding the planets in alignment, and the gravitational forces then going out, and then space, and where does that end? And
mm.
most people shut down, like, no, no, I can't see it. I can't accept that, but it's there. When people say they don't believe it, well, you just have to look out in space and there it is in front of you. If there is a border, where is the border? If it wraps round in a circle or a donut, where's the outside of it? So I think that perhaps there was some kind of intelligence, cosmic force that had seen to the ultimate creation. People call it God. People have different words for it, names for it, because they're not able to relate to that because it's a power beyond our mental capacity to understand that. But something's happened, and the other thing that I find really annoying, Mark, is people say, "Oh no, we're the only intelligent species in the universe." Well, how on earth can they answer that question
Can't
when
know.
they don't even know where the edge of space is?
Uh,
And that's even considering the interdimensional hypothesis. It's crazy. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's always profound talking with you. Just tell us briefly about your new book and any works you've got coming up.
Yeah, sure. My new book that's come out, I've co-authored with a dear friend of mine, Chris John Mays from London. He's a psychic medium artist and poet and all the rest of it. And it's called The Eternal Avatar. And that's published in America, but can be obtained in England. And I'm working on a new book,
Mhm.
which deals with the oppressive force that's here and the lies, disinformation that's been given to the public, not just about the UFOs or life after death, but also creation. So it's kind of like a hefty project, but I want to, make clear to people that there are three questions that we're asking, and yet every time we ask them, you're pushed down. It's like, how dare you? Life after death, UFOs, and creation. And I believe that those three there can make you can make connections to them, and that will lead us back to the past. And this is why the system doesn't want us to know that, because it will awaken to the fact that we've been lied to, and that is the truth of God. We all of us have been lied to by a system that says 1 minute it's there, then the next minute it's not. Yeah.
Sure. That was one of my questions I forgot to ask when you were talking about, life after death and what happens to our souls and coming back. Do you think there are, and that life on Earth being a bit of a kind of a prison, for want of a better word? Do you think there are those that are in power? I don't want to get too conspiracy, but do you think those are in power that know this? Do you think there's secret knowledge?
Yes, I do. And I believe this is interesting, if I may just explain
Mm,
here, Mark. So, if there is a force that's still here, which I believe that is not part of us as being humans,
mm,
that it's interesting, isn't it, that as humans, our consciousness has always been subjugated. We have a brain that's a transmitter for mind consciousness. We create from the mind, and yet our minds have been,
mhm,
programmed,
mhm,
conscious dissidents. And I believe that those at the top of the symbolic pyramid of power, the nameless, faceless bureaucrats, those in real governance that we haven't seen,
mhm.
I believe that they're utilizing every part of what we call the mind to bring in these alternative dimensions of reality.
Wow.
And I have addressed this in Avatar and in
Okay.
my other projects as well too.
Yeah.
So yes, I believe that they're dumbing us down, and they've got the real magic. They know how to utilize that, but they're condemning us. So there's obviously a reason why we're in holding,
Mhm,
why we're kind of like impending. I'm sorry, I could use that word. The human species has always been impending. We've never been allowed to advance and to develop beautifully, creatively, intellectually. Because the system only wants it one way and one way only. So, I think it's very, very interesting to consider that point, and I believe that. I think this force has been here for a very, very long time and utilizes certain tactics that we will say, "Oh my goodness, look, it's the aliens, they're coming," and they probably have access to mental powers. They're able to draw these alternative beings
mhm.
from these lower or perhaps higher dimensions forward into our realm. So yes, I do believe that.